If you ask many Wild fans, there are three burning questions that they want answered this offseason. What does Filip Gustavsson's contract extension look like? Where does Calen Addison fit in? And where do we see Marco Rossi in the lineup? We're going to answer all those on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right. Welcome into another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. If this is your first time tuning into Locked on Wild, we welcome you on board and hope that you tune in throughout the rest of the offseason into next season as well. If you're an everydayer who tunes in each and every day of the week, we're glad to have you back. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we get to the bottom of some burning questions for this offseason with Aaron Heckman and Dylan Loucks of the Hockey News. We'll talk about Filip Gustavsson's impending extension. We'll talk Calen Addison and the back end of the Wild D-core and Sam Steele or Marco Rossi. We will decide here today. As mentioned, very excited to be joined by Aaron Heckman and Dylan Loucks, who combined to form the Hockey News, new outlet for Minnesota Wild content here throughout the offseason and into next season as well. Fellas, welcome on. And first off, let's take just a second to talk about the site a little bit and just give me both of your perspectives as to what the Hockey News will bring for Minnesota Wild coverage and what you're excited to kind of dive into here throughout the offseason. Aaron, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so thanks for having us on. I think we'll have I feel like a lot of stuff. We'll have prospect stuff. We'll have news, obviously, analysis, some videos like after the game. Yeah, so kind of like a variety of things. So it's not just like one thing.
For sure. That one-stop shop for all things Minnesota Wild related. Dylan, I'll ask you the same question. What sorts of things can Wild fans look for from the Hockey News as you guys continue to pump out the content and get rolling here through the rest of the offseason?
Yeah, obviously, like Aaron said, thanks for having us on. This is really good for us and the site. Yeah, we're excited for the season to start. Aaron kind of touched on it. We'll have a bunch of prospect stuff, analytics stuff. I think hopefully we'll be able to do some features on some players, things like that. Mainly on game days, we'll have a lot of content that will come out, like lines, a pregame thing, a postgame thing. And then, like Aaron said, we'll have some videos too. I think we'll also maybe get a podcast. We don't know yet, but that's obviously a possibility too. Or we'll just keep bugging you to get on this. Yeah, we'll have a bunch of stuff, and obviously we're really excited. We're kind of taking bits and pieces of what other people do for the Hockey News and kind of keep it consistent mainly. But yeah.
Excellent. Well, let's dive in. The people want to know, and we're going to try to figure out the answers to these questions today. Let's start with Filip Gustavsson. His extension has not happened as of yet. Bill Guerin maintains that he's not worried about this, spilling over, about there being an offer sheet situation. He's confident it will get done. So first question before we dive into what this deal looks like. Aaron, do you agree? Do you share that agreement that the Wild should be confident that this will get done? It's just a matter of time? Or are we just kind of hoping that some team doesn't swoop in to try to steal Gustavsson away?
I mean, I think there should be some confidence. I mean, I think it's a tough situation because he's really only had one established year, showing he can he can be a number one guy. So I think it's a really interesting case. I don't know. I mean, I feel like it could go to arbitration too, though. So yeah.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see if it does go that route. A little different situation than what we had with Kevin Fiala, but still anytime you hear arbitration, you're like, oh boy, here we go again. Dylan, where are you at with a Gustavsson extension? Are you confident that we'll see things get done, or would it behoove the Wild to try to get this done a little quicker so that you don't have somebody come knocking at the door to try to pry him away?
Yeah, I mean, I think he wants to stay here at least, which is obviously something that the Wild can kind of play with. I do agree that arbitration might be something that like scares you, but I don't think this would be that big of a deal if you had Gustafsson on arbitration. Because, I mean, it would just be a 1-year deal, and then he can kind of prove to you that, hey, last season was not a fluke. I can continue to do that. Plus, that's when Fleury's contract is up, so maybe you want to actually commit long-term to him. Otherwise, if you don't go that route, you could probably see like a 2 to a 3 year, maybe 4 contract extension, but I'm sure we'll probably get into that later.
Yeah, and Joe Smith in his latest piece for The Athletic said that he wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being either a 1-year deal or something a little longer. But this is where Jesper Wallstedt kind of factors into play here. Is he is down in Iowa, expected to be the goalie of the future. And so do you do something to overlap a little bit with his Wild tenure, and then, depending on where things are at with Gustafsson, roll that way? Or do you hand the reins off to Wallstedt when he's ready to rock and give Gustafsson like a 2-year deal and then call it good? Aaron, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see if they can have it as like a 1-2 punch. I feel like that could be difficult. Because I mean, Wallstedt, I you know what I mean, down the line, I'm assuming they'd want to give him a long-term deal as the number one. So it's like you don't want to give up too much to Gustafsson. So yeah, I think it's an interesting situation. I mean, if they can get them both locked down like in the future, that'd be a really good thing. But it's also like goalies are really like it's kind of voodoo that we've seen. Like it's very inconsistent. So it's like, how much do you really want to give away to your goalies? So
Yeah,
especially with other top prospects.
exactly. And how much do you want to commit to Gustafsson with Wallstedt down there? Because then he's going to want that number one money too. Dylan, what do you think about the potential to put Gustafsson and Wallstedt together for more than, say, one season? Would it be a good idea for the Wild, or should they avoid putting all that capital into two guys that will essentially be trying to fill the same role?
Yeah, I think both you and Aaron brought up a good point, but like my thing would be, say Wallstedt comes in and his first season is like the last year of Gustafsson's contract. I think that's probably good for him because at that point he's probably, 22, 23. You're probably not expecting him to start or at least play in 64 plus games. So I mean, it wouldn't hurt you to have it split up between Gustafsson plus, say Gus has another insane year. Maybe you want to keep him for a backup or he goes on to bigger and better things. But I would say it would probably be a good thing to have another goalie that you can trust to start games, just so you don't have to like put all the pressure on Wallstedt because he is your like prize top goalie prospect, and really you don't want to ruin that, especially if you're looking to commit to him way down the road. So it's nice to kind of have that backup just in case, and kind of a guy to push him too. I mean, Gus is young as well, so that's nothing but motivation for Wallstedt too, which can be a very, very good thing.
Yeah, most definitely. And then, at worst case, you've got the Talbot Fleury tandem 2.0, where those guys split starts and you roll with that. So it's going to be interesting. I would like to see it happen here sooner than later because it would be the most Minnesota thing of all time. And not that getting a second round pick for Gustafsson would be bad. That wouldn't be that bad, but it would be the most Minnesota thing of all time to have somebody swoop in and offer him like $5 million a year, which is just a stupid amount of money. And then you're like, yeah, we can't match that. So that's what I'm hoping doesn't happen, but it'll be fascinating to see how the Gustafsson negotiations play out here over the next couple of weeks and into the rest of the offseason. We have a logjam on the back end of the Wild decor. And so we're going to dive into that next. We'll talk about Alex Goligoski's future with the team, as well as Calen Addison's future with the Wild as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Picture this. You want to go see the Minnesota Twins play at Target Field in a gorgeous summer evening. So you pop online trying to find tickets and there's nothing available. Finding tickets the day of an event should not be as stressful as it sometimes is, but Game Time is here to help. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They offer killer deals on last-minute tickets. With their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and get hyped for the fun you'll have. The best part about Game Time is they show you seat views before you buy your tickets so you know exactly what your viewpoint will be without having to worry about obstructions. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, you can tune in for tomorrow's episode in which we will evaluate the 2022-2023 season for Jon Merrill. So be on the lookout for that coming up tomorrow. Should be a spicy one, to say the least. Continuing our chat with Aaron Heckman and Dylan Loucks of the Hockey News. Fellas, let's talk about the back end of the Wild's D-Corps. Alex Goligoski met with Bill Guerin about the potential of him waiving his no-movement clause. Dylan, do you think he does that, or do you think he elects to stay with Minnesota for the final year of his contract? Which way are you leaning?
I honestly think he'll probably want to stay. I mean, at least from what I saw from, last year, it sounded like it was maybe hard on him for not being in the lineup all the time. But at 38, he probably doesn't know what's in store for his future too, in terms of like when he's going to stop playing. Obviously being from here, he probably wants to stay here, and as long as he's fine with playing, what could be another like under 50 game season, I don't see why not, for him to want to stay here. Now, if he wants to play a full season in his last year of his contract and maybe try to get another contract, then maybe he does move his no move clause, but I don't know where he would go from there. But yeah, I do think that he might be here next year, but we'll see.
Aaron, what do you think about that? Should he waive it? Will he waive it? Will he stay? Which way do you lean?
I think a lot of it depends on Addison too. You know what I mean? Like whether he's kind of going to stay for a longer term piece, or saw rumors that he could potentially be dealt if someone came up, like a deal came up. So I think a lot of it depends on Addison. I wouldn't mind seeing a Goligoski and Merrill like rotate with Addison on that third pair. So I think it's hard because like Goligoski was really good at times, but other times it's like his foot speed was definitely exposed, and it was like, okay, but then it's like other times like he was doing better after long stretches off. So I feel like that's a factor too. And then, Merrill, I feel like him and Merrill could be like a good like rotation there in that third pair with Addison. So
sure. And I like that Goligoski kind of is on the same trajectory that I feel like I would be, where you're effective for like a few games in a row, but then you just get winded after that. And you need like 15, 20 games to recover. That'd be me if I was on the ice. So it's going to be interesting. I do like the idea of rotating those two guys. I do think, and I'll ask if you guys agree with this, I do think if you're going to keep Calen Addison, he has to play. I know there was talk from the coaching staff about defensive issues and positioning and just playing grittier. He has to play if he is going to be here. Otherwise, you may as well just trade him. If you're not going to give him time to work on that kind of stuff, you may as well trade him. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like. Go ahead.
Go. Okay. I was just saying, Aaron and I were both talking about this yesterday. It's like, if you're going to keep him, you have to play him. And it's one thing, like, he's young, and like, what I think is that, sure, he hasn't been that good defensively, but still at this young of an age, like, he can get better at it. Plus, he's got, one of the best two-way defensemen in the NHL, like, just a couple lines up from him, who's also almost the same size as him. So, like, he can obviously learn from Spurgeon, and get better defensively. But if you really don't think that he can get better defensively and you really only project him to be a power play specialist and offensive only, then, maybe you move him. But I don't think that's impossible to work in on his game and make him a little bit better defensively.
Aaron, what do you think?
Well, and he's 23. It takes time, like patience. I don't get the rush that he's got to be all ready and everything and polished and everything. And honestly, frankly, I don't think he had as bad of struggles as it was like made out to be. I think there was definitely some issues there, but I'm not sure it was exactly as bad as some people made it out to be.
Well, and let's be honest too. The power play suffered without him in the lineup. It's not like, and I liked a lot of what Klingberg did when he came here, especially in 5-on-5. But that power play without Calen Addison up top just was not anywhere close to the same level of success with him in the lineup. And so that's the positive, but you both nailed it in that you're talking about a young defenseman here who should be able to learn and adapt and grow. And it just feels weird to me to pull him out of the lineup for that, considering the amount of times that we saw or we have seen in the last couple of years. Dmitry Kulikov getting olayed in front of the net over and over and over. Jon Merrill doing the same thing. Like it's just bizarre to have those guys not getting penalized for doing some of those things, while Addison makes like one mistake and he just immediately gets thrown in the doghouse. It's backwards to me.
Yeah.
So I just
it's difficult because, looking even a year or two down the road, even right now, you have a very defensive-oriented top four in Faber, Brody, and Spurgeon and Middleton. So it's like you kind of need his shot. You need his offensive ability. And I think, obviously, you mentioned he's an asset on the power play. So it's like, I don't know, you move him and all of a sudden, like, you don't have much offense on that back end that can really be depended on.
Yeah. Just I always go back to just be careful about trying to find like the greener grass on the other side. You might not find it if you end up trading Addison and then all of a sudden, oh no, the power play is doing the exact same things. Well, gee, I wonder why. So I don't know. I feel it's going to be interesting.
This summer is also like bad timing. I feel like too, like give him another year where you see what he can do in another year, his progress, but not only that, but his value. His value is not at an all-time high right now.
Yeah.
And chances are he'll have a better season, take some of what he took from this past season and implement that. And there you go. You got more value there if you do decide to make that move. But I think this summer would be too early to make that decision, especially with how young he is and he hasn't had a lot of experience yet. So,
yeah, I agree. Dylan, anything to add before we turn to Sam Steele and Marco Rossi?
No, I was just going to say, I guess it's kind of obvious that Klingberg's probably gone unless he's brought back on league minimum. So it's like, who would be running the top power play unit? So, obviously you're going to want to keep Addison, and who cares if he's just a power play specialist? But I do think he's still got that part of the game that can improve defensively too. So
that specialist rhetoric is interesting, considering that we are looking at re-signing Ryan Reeves to basically do exactly that. So we'll see. But I did want to save the big fish for last because we've got an interesting discussion that is going to be brewing here, because I think consensus, like with Calen Addison, is that we want to see what Marco Rossi has, but there needs to be a spot freed up for us to be able to do that. And so we'll finish today's episode debating who takes one of those last center spots on today's episode of Locked On Wilds after this. Are you tired of feeling restricted in your shorts? Want to look good and feel comfortable at the same time? Look no further than Bird Dogs, the ultimate solution for the modern man. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are specifically designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Say goodbye to baggy, shapeless shorts and hello to the confidence of a tailored fit. But here's the secret. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as those other big-name brands, but they fit way better. No more compromising on comfort or style. They've revolutionized shorts by making cloud knit fabric, a magical blend that looks just like khaki but stretches, allowing you to move freely while maintaining a slim and stylish appearance. But wait, there's more. When you order from birddogs.com/lockedonnhl, you'll receive a free Yeti-style tumbler with your first purchase. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnhl. But beware, once you put on your Bird Dogs, I guarantee you're not going to want to take them off. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, make sure that you stick with us through the rest of this week. Into next week, we will continue our player evals. And any time we get any sort of notable Wild news, we will, of course, have you covered there as well. But we're going to go through the third pairing defensemen. There are a few of them, so we'll get through those next week. Then the fourth line guys, goalies, coach, and GM as well. Everybody gets their turn. So we'll have those for you here as we move throughout the next couple of weeks right up to the NHL draft. Aaron Heckman and Dylan Loucks joining me from the Hockey News. Dylan, I know you had a chance to dive into this topic, which is exactly why we are talking about it on today's show. But Sam Steele had an interesting season with the Wild, his first year in Minnesota, set a career high in a lot of offensive categories, but in my estimation was put in a bunch of different situations he maybe necessarily isn't best utilized in, such as higher up in the lineup. So with what we saw from Steele, with what we know about what he is as a player, do you think the Wild should look to retain him long-term? They do have his rights, so you could, I suppose, look to trade him. But what do you think the best course of action is for Sam Steele going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on a bit in my story yesterday that went out on Steele, but like I can't imagine he'd want more than like 1.5 million a year. So I mean, I feel like it doesn't hurt to bring him back another season. We saw the way that he can kind of bounce up and down the lineup. I don't think that he's probably has a future in the top six, which is kind of, weird for a guy who had over 130 points in, Canadian Hockey League and was a former first round pick. But with his speed, we saw how it kind of works with Duar. And I think that if you have even Steele on the fourth line, it's not going to hurt you. Like, he had a pretty decent season last year defensively. The only thing I will say is I don't know if he's a true center. Like, moving him to the wing could kind of use his speed a little bit more and maybe could spark some offense. I don't think he gets into the top six, though, and I'm sure we'll touch on it, but I would want Rossi in the top six, excuse me. But, yeah, I do think they could probably bring Steele back because I can't imagine it would be much more than what he currently had was $825,000 a year. So it could be in the 900,000 range, maybe $1 million, but probably not much over that. So it doesn't hurt to bring him back, but probably just for one more year.
Yeah. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, he touched on a lot of good points. I mean, he's versatile. He was really clutch, every time he came back into the lineup, it felt like he was scoring. Like Dylan said, I'm not sure there's really upside there. I don't think he's going to be a future top sixer necessarily, but yeah, I mean, I feel like you can't go wrong, but I also feel like it's a type of situation where it's less about Steele and is a guy like Sammy Walker or like Adam Beckman ready for that wing spot. You know what I mean? I feel like at some point you got to bring these guys up and see what they're made of in a larger sample size. So I don't even know if it's necessarily a Steele thing. It's more like, is there a spot for him? Because you can't go wrong with re-signing him. So.
Yeah, I agree there. This team is pretty crowded as it is, and with the salary cap restraints, especially for the next two seasons, you're going to have to lean on young guys to fill those spots, but it feels like there just aren't a ton that are open, which is why it gets kind of frustrating with Rossi because he was down at Iowa the whole season after a rough start, which was a lot on him being put in the wrong positions. I mean, fourth line guy, that didn't work out. And so then after that, it was like, well, we're just going to hit the reset button. But where does he fit on this team? You guys, I think, are both right on. It's got to be a top six spot, but who comes out to give him a roster spot? It doesn't seem likely that anybody really does at this point. So where are we at with Rossi? Dylan, you start.
Yeah, I think with the thought of maybe Mason Shaw not being ready for the start of the season and maybe Ryan Reeves still up in the air, I think if you did bring Steele back, he could just slot in your fourth line with Duar and Duhaime. One thing that I would do is, obviously the second line is probably set in stone. I mean, that might have been probably a huge reason why Johansson was re-signed with Boldy and Eck, but I would honestly play Rossi with Kaprizov and Zuccarello, and then I would slide Hartman down to the third line and maybe move him to right wing, have him play with Foligno and Gaudreau, and then at that point you have a pretty good defensive third line, but it's also a third line that can add some scoring touch to it. And then I feel like at that point Foligno probably doesn't, maybe feel the weight that he needs to have another 20-goal season when he's playing. With Freddie Gaudreau, he scored 19 goals, and then Hartman, obviously a former 30-goal scorer. And plus those three, I think, could work well defensively. Obviously, that's in the perfect world, but, Rossi was drafted to be hopefully a future number one center, so why not give him the opportunity? I'd play him in preseason there, give him a legit shot in regular season. And if he doesn't fit with them, maybe drop him down, have him play with Boldy and Johansson. If he doesn't fit there, then, maybe go on and find something else. But you got to give him a legit shot in the top six. If it's not even on power play one, he's got to be on power play two. But I would play him with Kaprizov and Zuccarello, move Hartman down the third line, and really see what you got there.
Aaron, what do you think?
I think you absolutely crushed it. I think you got to give him that top line. And I think, it's like Hartman, I feel like putting him back in the wing like he has been before he moved to center, I feel like is a good thing too, and takes weight off his shoulders. And, I think Rossi just needs that. He's got to have that chance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, the fourth line just didn't work. And I mean, he crushed it in Iowa. He was a different player towards the end of the year, and he deserves it to at least have the shot, and you can always change things up if it doesn't work out. But
yeah, I agree. I mean, the notion that he could just be like a play in spurts fourth line guy, and not to knock Brandon Duhaime and Connor Dewar, because those guys play huge roles on this team, but they have very different skill sets than Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Zuccarello, Matt Boldy, and Marcus Johansson. It's just a different skill set, and one that's way more complementary to Rossi than those guys are. And we're just to this point with these young players. You have to give them a shot to see what you have, so that going forward over the next couple of years, because in 2 seasons after these Parisian Suter ghosts hit their minimum, you are going to be able to spend money on whatever you need to make sure that you have a legit cup run at that time. And so you have to know exactly what you need, and not playing those guys it just leaves a ton of questions. And then all of a sudden you have all that money to spend and you're just throwing it at things because you don't really know what you need, but you need something. And that's how we get into the exact same situation that we were in with these contracts in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, you're really building for that 2025-26 season. I mean, I wrote about it a month ago, I think it was. If you take a little bit of take a little dip the next 2 years, I mean, they're still going to be competitive, but who cares if you take a dip in everything? I mean, give these guys a chance. And I mean, this is really a bridge from the old to the new. So these 2 years are really where you can figure out things and what you need for that season. So, I mean, I think you got to give these guys a shot and see what they're made of and give them opportunity. So when you're not doing this for that season, you're ready.
Yeah. Dylan, anything to add there?
That's pretty much it. I mean, because if you give Rossi these 2 years as the number one guy or a top six role, and he's only producing, 45, 55 points, then maybe when those Parisian Suter buyouts are kind of back down to I think it's 833,000 or whatever for each, then maybe you can go out and try to get that number one center, and then maybe Rossi turns into a second or, whatever. But if you play him in this top six role and he starts producing or showing promise of a future first line center, what you have in 25, 26, plus with the Kuzna Diovs and the Yurovs and the Olgrens all coming in, you really start to get something. But if you wait all the way until then to use them, then you don't know what you're going to do with, say maybe you've got like 15 million in cap that you have to use. Well, you don't know what to use it for, I guess. So, yeah.
And for crying out loud, Victor Rask and the boat anchor that he was productive with those guys. And playing with Kaprizov and Zuccarello is going to take pressure off of Rossi to where he can kind of, we've seen it happen with like 5 of the guys that have played in that spot. You can play back seat to those guys and kind of find your way along, and then all of a sudden you start producing at that same level as they are. I mean, you got to give it a shot at this point.
Yeah. I mean, there's no problem with guys, prospects like these guys like Rossi, like marinating in the AHL, but I mean, at some point you got to give them a chance. I mean, these guys aren't going to be 100% polished. So I don't get the idea that these guys got to be 100% ready. Like, let them grow, let them make mistakes, and that's how they're going to learn. And if you don't give them a situation, they're not going to learn.
We learned through failure. That was a huge point on the show yesterday for the everydayers that tune in. They heard that. We learned through failure, and you can't learn from mistakes unless you're put in positions to make them and just accept that they're going to happen and move on from it. So we'll see. I think a lot of us are hoping for one particular thing to happen, but until we actually see it happen in terms of the lineup and such, we're just kind of where we're at. So we'll keep an eye on things. Fellas, awesome episode today. Thanks for tuning in. This won't be the last time, Locked On Wild listeners, that you hear from Aaron and Dylan. So make sure to check out their work at the Hockey News. We'll give them a plug when we post today's episode as well. And thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Again, if this is your first time tuning into Locked On Wild, we thank you for joining us today and hope you tune in for future episodes throughout the offseason and into next year as well. If you're an everydayer who just is checking another episode off your list this week, we're glad to have you along and hope you tune in tomorrow as well. You can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.